deep in the heart of Africa, where mist clings to ancient trees and sunlight struggles to pierce the canopy, there exists a secret that could rewrite everything we know about extinction. The Congo Basin, a primeval wilderness spanning over 2 million square miles, holds mysteries that would make even the most hardened scientists question reality itself. What if I told you that somewhere in those impenetrable swamps, beneath waters darker than midnight, a creature from the age of dinosaurs might still draw breath? What if the line between myth and reality isn't as clear as we've been taught to believe? For decades, explorers have vanished into these depths. Expeditions have returned with evidence so compelling that governments have classified their findings. Local tribes speak in hushed whispers of something ancient that moves beneath the surface, something that shouldn't exist in our modern world. Tonight on Ancient Dreams, we're diving into one of the most extraordinary mysteries our planet has ever concealed. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand why the scientific community remains divided, why certain footage has never been released to the public, and why this creature, if it exists, could change our understanding of evolution forever. But first, let me share something that will send chills down your spine. In 1981, Dr. Roy McCall led an expedition into the Likwala region of the Congo. What his team discovered defied every law of biology they thought they understood. The evidence they brought back was so startling that it sparked decades of secret research missions. Yet somehow, this story has remained buried in classified files and hushed academic circles. The creature we're investigating tonight goes by many names. The locals call it Mokele-Mbembe, which translates to the one who stops the flow of rivers. But Western cryptozoologists know it by a different description, one that sends shockwaves through the paleontology community. They describe it as a living sauropod dinosaur. Now, before you dismiss this as fantasy, consider this. The Congo Rainforest is one of the most unexplored regions on Earth. Satellite imagery reveals vast areas where no human footprint has ever been recorded. The ecosystem here has remained virtually unchanged for millions of years, creating what scientists call evolutionary refugia, pockets of ancient life that time forgot. Every year, researchers discover dozens of new species in these depths, creatures that seem pulled from prehistoric nightmares, fish that generate electricity, mammals that glow in the dark, and reptiles with abilities that challenge our understanding of biology. If such extraordinary adaptations can persist here, what else might have survived? The story begins with the indigenous peoples of the Congo Basin. For generations, the Baka, the Aka, and dozens of other tribes have passed down detailed accounts of massive creatures inhabiting the deepest swamps. These aren't vague folklore tales. The descriptions are remarkably consistent across hundreds of miles and multiple unconnected cultures. They describe an animal the size of an elephant, but with a neck that stretches like a python. Its skin is smooth and dark, resembling that of a hippopotamus, but covering a body shaped unlike any known African wildlife. The creature feeds on plants along riverbanks, they say, but becomes violently territorial when threatened. Witnesses claim its roar can be heard for miles, echoing through the forest like thunder from below. What makes these accounts particularly fascinating is their specificity. The tribes describe behavioral patterns, feeding habits, even seasonal movements. This level of detail suggests encounters with an actual animal rather than mythological invention. Some elders claim their ancestors once hunted smaller versions of these creatures, describing meat that tasted unlike any modern animal. But it wasn't until European explorers began penetrating the Congo interior that these stories reached the outside world. In 1776, French missionary Abbé Liévin Bonaventure wrote of massive tracks discovered along muddy riverbanks, prints showing 3 distinct toes and measuring over 2 feet in diameter. No known African animal could produce such markings. The first serious scientific interest emerged in the early 20th century. German animal trader Karl Hagenbeck heard consistent reports from multiple sources describing a creature that matched descriptions of long-necked dinosaurs. In 1909, he he publicly announced his belief that living dinosaurs might exist in the Congo swamps. Hagenbeck's claims ignited international fascination. If true, it would represent the discovery of the century, proof that extinction wasn't always permanent. The scientific establishment, however, remained skeptical. Without concrete evidence, such claims belonged in the realm of fantasy rather than serious research. Then came the expeditions that changed everything. The first major investigation launched in 1980, led by American engineer Herman Registers. His team spent months navigating treacherous waterways, interviewing dozens of witnesses, and documenting the unexplored ecosystem. What they discovered exceeded their wildest expectations. Deep in the Likuala swamps, Registers' team recorded a sound that still haunts researchers today. The audio captures a low-frequency call, almost subsonic, unlike any known animal in Africa. When analyzed by acoustic specialists, the sound showed characteristics similar to the theoretical vocalizations of large sauropods based on their estimated lung capacity and throat structure. But sound wasn't their only evidence. The expedition documented massive disturbances in swamp vegetation, areas where something enormous had clearly moved through, leaving a trail of destruction. Trees over a foot in diameter were snapped like twigs. Sections of riverbank showed deep gouges, as if something heavy had hauled itself from the water. Most compelling were the footprints. Cast in drying mud along the Likuala River, the team found tracks measuring 26 inches in diameter. The prints showed 3 distinct toes, with what appeared to be claw marks at the tips. No elephant, hippo, or any known African animal could produce such tracks. When Registers returned to the United States, his evidence sparked fierce debate in zoological circles. Skeptics argued the sounds could be misidentified hippos or elephants. The vegetation damage, they claimed, might result from seasonal flooding or elephant activity. Even the footprints faced scrutiny, with critics suggesting they were either hoaxes or misidentified tracks from known animals. But Registers wasn't finished. In 1981, he returned to the Congo with a larger team and more sophisticated equipment. This second expedition ventured deeper into unexplored territory, areas where even local guides rarely traveled. What happened during those weeks in the deep swamp remains partially classified. According to leaked reports, the team encountered something that defied rational explanation. Multiple witnesses described a creature emerging from murky waters, its neck rising like a periscope, before disappearing back into the depths. The official expedition report was heavily redacted upon its release. Entire sections dealing with direct encounters were blacked out or removed entirely. However, fragments that survived government censorship paint a picture of something extraordinary lurking in those ancient waters. Dr. Mokele, who joined the expedition as chief biologist, later admitted in private interviews that they encountered evidence of multiple large unknown animals. His field notes, discovered years after his death, describe massive wakes moving through still water with no visible source. He documented areas where aquatic vegetation had been systematically harvested, suggesting herbivorous feeding behavior by something much larger than any known Congo wildlife. The expeditions of the early 80s established a pattern that continues today. Teams venture into the Congo depths with high expectations and sophisticated equipment. They return with tantalizing evidence, compelling stories, and more questions than answers. Yet somehow, definitive proof remains elusive. This elusiveness has led to wild speculation about government cover-ups and suppressed evidence. Why would authorities want to hide the discovery of living dinosaurs? Some researchers suggest that proving such creatures exist would create international complications regarding conservation, territory rights, and scientific prestige. Others believe the implications for evolutionary biology are so profound that the scientific establishment prefers maintaining uncertainty rather than admitting such a fundamental oversight. But perhaps the most intriguing theory suggests that these creatures, if they exist, represent something far more significant than mere surviving dinosaurs. What if they're evidence of parallel evolution? Life forms that developed independently in the Congo's isolated ecosystem? The implications would revolutionize our understanding of how life adapts and survives over geological timescales. Recent technological advances have brought new tools to the search. Satellite imagery can now penetrate cloud cover that previously obscured vast sections of the Congo Basin. Underwater cameras can capture footage in environments too dangerous for human exploration. DNA sampling techniques can detect traces of unknown species from water samples alone. Yet despite these advances, definitive evidence remains frustratingly out of reach. Every promising lead seems to dissolve under scientific scrutiny. Every photograph proves inconclusive. Every DNA sample returns results that could be explained by known species or contamination. This pattern has created a phenomenon unique in cryptozoology. Unlike other legendary creatures that fade under scientific investigation, the Mokele-Mbembe case seems to grow stronger with each expedition. The evidence may not satisfy skeptics, but it's substantial enough to keep serious researchers returning to those dark waters year after year. What makes this mystery particularly compelling is the ecosystem itself. The Congo Basin represents one of Earth's most pristine environments, a place where evolutionary processes continue largely undisturbed by human interference. If any location on our planet could harbor surviving megafauna from prehistoric eras, it would be here in these primeval swamps. Eval swamps. The biological diversity already documented in the Congo provides compelling support for this possibility. Scientists have catalogued species here that seem lifted directly from prehistoric nightmares. The Goliath beetle, weighing more than some birds and armored like ancient arthropods. Electric fish that navigate murky waters using bioelectric fields. A sensory system that evolved independently from any other known lineage. Bioluminescent fungi that turn entire forest floors into galaxies of living light. Each discovery reinforces the Congo's reputation as an evolutionary laboratory, where impossible creatures thrive in isolation. The forest canopy itself creates a unique environment, filtering sunlight into an eternal twilight that has remained unchanged for millions of years. Beneath this green ceiling, temperature and humidity fluctuate within narrow ranges that could preserve ancient life forms in a kind of biological stasis. Dr. Michel Ballot, a French herpetologist who has spent decades studying Congo wildlife, describes the region as existing outside normal evolutionary pressures. The abundance of food, stable climate, and lack of major predators creates what he calls a preservation zone, where archaic species can persist long after their relatives elsewhere have vanished. But it's not just the environment that supports the possibility of surviving megafauna. The sheer scale of unexplored territory provides ample space for large creatures to remain hidden. Consider this: the Likuala swamps alone cover an area larger than Switzerland, yet fewer than 1,000 humans have ever set foot in most of these regions. Satellite imagery reveals waterways that wind for hundreds of miles through territories where no roads exist, no settlements have been established, and no systematic biological surveys have ever been conducted. Within this vast wilderness, countless species could exist in complete isolation from human detection. Large animals need extensive territories, and the Congo provides exactly that. A population of several hundred large herbivores could thrive in the deepest swamps while remaining completely invisible to the outside world. The feeding behavior described by witnesses also aligns with what we know about sauropod ecology. These creatures supposedly consume massive quantities of aquatic vegetation, stripping entire riverbanks clean of edible plants. This behavior would be consistent with the high metabolic demands of large herbivorous reptiles. The Congo's year-round growing season could easily support such feeding patterns, providing endless renewal of food sources. Local guides who have spent their entire lives navigating these waterways speak of areas they refuse to enter, zones where the water runs deeper and darker than anywhere else. They describe channels that seem to lead nowhere, disappearing into impenetrable walls of vegetation where even their ancestors feared to travel. These forbidden areas often coincide with the locations where sightings occur most frequently. Maps compiled from decades of witness accounts show remarkable clustering around specific swamp systems, particularly the deeper channels of the Likwala and Sanga river networks. The consistency of these location reports suggests that if unknown creatures do exist, they maintain specific territorial ranges rather than wandering randomly through the forest. What's particularly intriguing is how these territorial boundaries have remained consistent across generations of witnesses. Stories collected in the 1930s describe creature activity in the same locations where modern expeditions report their most compelling evidence. This geographic stability suggests behavioral patterns typical of established animal populations rather than random encounters with mythical beings. The physical evidence continues to accumulate despite the lack of definitive proof. In 1988, Japanese television producer Takeshi Kudo led an expedition that captured underwater footage showing large shadows moving beneath the surface of Lake Tele. The shapes in the footage appear too large and move too smoothly to be explained by known aquatic life. Frame-by-frame analysis reveals what appears to be a massive elongated form gliding through the water with undulating movements, unlike any fish, crocodile, or mammal. More recently, conservation biologists studying forest elephant populations have documented areas where vegetation damage patterns don't match known elephant behavior. These zones show evidence of systematic plant harvesting from riverbanks, with bite marks on woody stems that suggest a different type of herbivore. The damage occurs at heights and angles inconsistent with elephant feeding, yet the scale indicates an animal of comparable size. DNA analysis of water samples from these feeding sites has yielded puzzling results. While most genetic material matches known species, some sequences remain unidentifiable. These mystery DNA fragments show characteristics of reptilian origin, but don't match any creature in existing genetic databases. Contamination remains a possibility, but the consistency of these unknown sequences across multiple sampling sites suggests something more significant. The acoustic evidence has grown more sophisticated as well. Modern hydrophones deployed in the deepest parts of the Likwala system have recorded subsonic calls that occur in patterns suggesting communication between multiple animals. The frequency range of these vocalizations falls well below what any known Congo wildlife can produce, yet shows the structured patterns typical of complex animal communication. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a marine biologist who specializes in whale communication, analyzed hours of these recordings for ancient dreams. Her conclusion was startling. The call patterns show sophisticated structure, with what appear to be individual signature sounds and coordinated responses between different callers. This suggests not just one unknown animal, but an entire population communicating across distances through the dense swamp environment. The implications of such evidence extend far beyond the simple existence of unknown creatures. If large animals have survived in the Congo for millions of years, they represent living laboratories for studying prehistoric life. Their physiology, behavior, and adaptations could unlock secrets about how massive terrestrial animals functioned during the age of dinosaurs. Furthermore, the discovery of surviving megafauna would revolutionize conservation biology. Understanding how these creatures have persisted through climate changes, habitat pressures, and other evolutionary challenges could provide crucial insights for protecting endangered species worldwide. The Congo ecosystem that supports such survivors might hold keys to preventing extinctions elsewhere on our planet. Recent advances in environmental DNA sampling have opened new possibilities for detection. Scientists can now identify species presence from trace genetic material in water, soil, even air samples. These techniques have successfully detected rare and elusive animals in other ecosystems, from deep-sea creatures to forest-dwelling mammals that have never been directly observed. Several research teams are currently deploying these methods throughout the Congo Basin, systematically sampling water and sediment from the most remote swamp systems. Preliminary results have already identified dozens of previously unknown fish and amphibian species, confirming that major discoveries await in these unexplored waters. The technology that once seemed like science fiction is now becoming routine research tools. Autonomous underwater vehicles can navigate channels too dangerous for human exploration. Motion-activated cameras can monitor remote areas for months without human presence. Acoustic monitoring systems can detect and classify animal sounds across vast territories simultaneously. These tools are gradually penetrating the Congo's deepest secrets, mapping territories that have remained unchanged since the Mesozoic era. What they're revealing challenges our assumptions about extinction, survival, and the limits of life on Earth. Yet for all our technological sophistication, the mystery deepens rather than resolves. Each new piece of evidence raises more questions than answers. Each expedition returns with tantalizing glimpses of something extraordinary, but never quite enough to satisfy scientific skepticism. Perhaps that's exactly as it should be. The Congo Basin represents one of our planet's last great mysteries, a reminder that despite all our knowledge and technology, vast realms of our own world remain completely unknown. In an age where we can map distant galaxies and decode genetic sequences, the idea that dinosaurs might still walk the Earth feels both impossible and oddly comforting. The search continues because the stakes are too high to abandon. If even one of these creatures exists, if even a single population of ancient giants survives in those dark waters, it would represent the biological discovery of our lifetime. It would prove that extinction isn't always permanent, that life finds ways to endure against impossible odds. The indigenous peoples of the Congo have developed sophisticated methods for tracking and avoiding these creatures over countless generations. Their knowledge systems, passed down through oral tradition, contain detailed information about seasonal patterns, territorial boundaries, and behavioral cues that modern science is only beginning to appreciate. The Baka people, forest dwellers who have inhabited these regions for thousands of years, describe specific times when the creatures are most active. According to their traditions, the peak activity occurs during the dry season when water levels drop and force the animals into more concentrated areas. During these periods, the Baka avoid certain waterways entirely, taking lengthy detours around territories they know to be occupied. Their tracking methods surpass anything Western science has developed for detecting large aquatic animals in dense jungle environments. They read subtle signs in disturbed vegetation, analyze the behavior of fish and water birds, and interpret acoustic cues that trained biologists often miss entirely. When Baka guides accompany research expeditions, the success rate of encounters increases dramatically. What's remarkable is how this traditional knowledge aligns with scientific theories about large herbivore behavior. The seasonal patterns described by the Baka match what paleontologists predict about sauropod ecology based on fossil evidence. The territorial behaviors they describe correspond to what we know about resource competition among large animals in limited environments. Dr. Jean-Baptiste Mambo, an anthropologist who has studied Congo Basin cultures for over 30 years, believes this traditional knowledge represents humanity's longest continuous documentation of megafauna behavior. The consistency of accounts across multiple tribal groups, he argues, suggests direct experience with real animals rather than shared mythology. The Baka describe the creatures as generally peaceful, but capable of explosive violence when threatened or surprised. They tell stories of boats being overturned by a single sweep of a massive tail, of fishing nets being destroyed by creatures emerging from deep water. These accounts consistently describe animals that are powerful, but not actively aggressive toward humans unless provoked. This behavioral profile matches what paleontologists theorize about large herbivorous dinosaurs. Modern studies of elephant and hippo behavior suggest that massive herbivores typically avoid conflict, but can become extremely dangerous when they feel cornered or threatened. The Congo creatures apparently follow similar behavioral patterns. The Baka also describe vocalizations that occur primarily at dawn and dusk, long rumbling calls that carry for miles through the forest. They claim these sounds serve as territorial markers, with individual animals announcing their presence to others in the area. Some elders can supposedly distinguish between different individuals based on variations in their calls, suggesting a level of vocal complexity that would indicate advanced social behavior. Modern acoustic analysis has begun to validate these traditional observations. Recordings made during the times when the Barker predict vocal activity show increased subsonic communication in exactly the frequency ranges they describe. The patterns match their descriptions of territorial announcements and responses between distant individuals. The traditional knowledge extends to feeding behavior as well. The Barker describe areas where certain aquatic plants are systematically harvested, always in the same locations and following predictable seasonal patterns. They know which plants the creatures prefer and can predict where feeding activity will occur based on vegetation cycles. Recent botanical surveys of these traditional feeding sites have revealed something extraordinary. The plant species that supposedly attract these creatures are all high in specific nutrients that would be essential for maintaining massive body size in a tropical environment. The selection pattern suggests an animal with sophisticated dietary requirements rather than indiscriminate grazing. The Barker knowledge system includes detailed maps of underwater territories that they've never directly observed. They describe channel depths, underwater cave systems, and hidden passages that connect different swamp areas. When modern sonar mapping finally reached these remote regions, it confirmed the accuracy of traditional knowledge with startling precision. These underwater territories represent the most likely refuges for large unknown animals. The deepest channels of the Likuala system plunge to depths exceeding 200 feet in some areas, creating vast underwater caverns where massive creatures could remain completely hidden from surface observation. The water in these depths maintains constant temperature year-round and provides protection from both human detection and seasonal environmental changes. The cave systems described in traditional accounts could explain how these creatures have avoided definitive detection for so long. Underground passages connecting different water bodies would allow movement between territories without surface exposure. Animals could travel dozens of miles through submerged tunnels, emerging in locations completely separated from their last known position. Geological surveys have confirmed the existence of extensive limestone cave networks throughout the Likuala region, formed over millions of years by underground water flow. Many of these systems remain completely unmapped and unexplored. The potential for massive underwater chambers capable of harboring large animal populations is scientifically validated, even if their inhabitants remain hypothetical. The traditional knowledge also addresses breeding behavior and population dynamics. According to Barker accounts, the creatures reproduce very slowly, with long intervals between generations. They describe seeing young animals only rarely, always in the deepest, most protected areas of the swamp system. This reproductive pattern would be consistent with the life history strategies of large, long-lived animals. Such slow reproduction could explain why population numbers remain low enough to avoid frequent human contact while still maintaining genetic viability. A breeding population of several hundred individuals spread across thousands of square miles of territory could persist indefinitely while rarely being observed by outsiders. The integration of traditional knowledge with modern scientific methods has opened new research possibilities. GPS mapping of traditionally known territories provides precise coordinates for deploying monitoring equipment. Acoustic analysis, guided by traditional predictions about vocal timing, has captured far more relevant data than random sampling methods. Environmental DNA sampling focused on traditional feeding sites has yielded the highest concentrations of unidentified genetic material. Water samples taken from areas where the Barker report regular creature activity consistently show unknown DNA sequences that don't match any catalogued species. The collaboration between traditional knowledge holders and modern researchers represents a new approach to cryptozoological investigation. Rather than dismissing indigenous accounts as folklore, scientists are learning to treat them as sophisticated empirical observations accumulated over centuries of direct experience. This partnership approach has already revolutionized our understanding of Congo Basin biodiversity. Dozens of new species have been discovered by following traditional knowledge to previously unknown ecological niches. The success rate suggests that traditional accounts of larger unknown animals deserve similar scientific attention. The Baka described the creatures as existing in perfect balance with their ecosystem, neither overpopulating their territories nor depleting their food sources. This ecological stability suggests animals that have evolved sophisticated resource management strategies over millions of years of isolation. Such evolutionary refinement could explain their continued survival despite environmental changes that eliminated their relatives elsewhere. The Congo ecosystem has provided a stable refuge where ancient life forms could perfect their adaptations without the disruption that led to extinction in other regions. The traditional knowledge also addresses the question of why these creatures remain hidden from modern detection. According to Baka accounts, the animals are extremely sensitive to human presence and have learned to avoid areas with regular human activity. Their acute senses allow them to detect approaching humans long before visual contact occurs. This behavioral adaptation would be expected in any large animal population that has coexisted with human hunters for thousands of years. The most successful survival strategy would involve maximum avoidance of human contact, exactly the behavior pattern described in traditional accounts. The Baka also explain that the creatures have become increasingly reclusive over recent decades as human activity in the region has intensified. Areas that once supported regular sightings now show no signs of creature presence, suggesting that the animals have retreated to even more remote territories as human encroachment increases. This retreat pattern corresponds with increased difficulty in documenting creature encounters during modern expeditions. What previous generations of explorers might have observed with relative frequency has become increasingly rare as the animals adapt their behavior to avoid human detection. The implications extend beyond simple creature behavior to fundamental questions about conservation and coexistence. If these animals truly exist, their survival depends entirely on maintaining vast territories free from human interference. The continued expansion of human activity into the Congo Basin poses an existential threat to any large unknown species that might persist there. The traditional knowledge keepers understand this threat intimately. Many Baka elders express concern that their grandchildren may inherit a forest emptied of the ancient giants that have shared their world for countless generations. Their stories carry an urgency that transcends mere folklore, reflecting genuine fear of losing something irreplaceable. This conservation urgency adds another layer to the mystery. The search for these creatures isn't just about satisfying scientific curiosity or proving the existence of living dinosaurs. It's about protecting what might be our planet's last surviving representatives of prehistoric megafauna before they disappear forever into the shadows of extinction. The race against time intensifies with each passing year as human activities penetrate deeper into previously untouched wilderness. Logging operations, mining concessions, and agricultural expansion are systematically destroying the pristine habitats that could harbor surviving ancient life forms. Remote sensing data shows that the Congo Basin is losing forest cover at an accelerating rate. The deep swamp systems that represent the most likely refuges for unknown creatures are particularly vulnerable to human disturbance. What took millions of years to evolve could vanish within decades if current trends continue. The traditional knowledge holders are acutely aware of this timeline. Their cooperation with modern researchers reflects not just scientific curiosity, but desperate urgency to document and protect what remains of their ancient world. They understand that once these territories are destroyed, any secrets they hold will be lost forever. The urgency becomes even more palpable when you consider the timeline we're working against. Satellite imagery from the past decade reveals something disturbing. The pristine wilderness that has protected these potential survivors for millions of years is shrinking at an unprecedented rate. Every month, another section of untouched swampland falls to human encroachment. Dr. Sarah Chen, a conservation biologist who monitors deforestation patterns across Central Africa, shared some sobering statistics with Ancient Dreams. The rate of habitat loss in the Likuala region has tripled since 2010. Areas that showed no human impact just 5 years ago now bear the scars of logging roads and mining operations. We're not just racing to prove these creatures exist. We're racing to find them before their world disappears entirely. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from an unexpected source. In 2019, a team of petroleum geologists working for a European energy company was conducting seismic surveys in a previously unexplored section of the northern Congo Basin. Their equipment, designed to map underground oil deposits, detected something extraordinary in the deeper water channels. The seismic readings showed massive displacement patterns moving through the water column. These weren't geological formations or equipment malfunctions. The patterns indicated large biological masses moving in coordinated groups through underwater territories. When the company's marine biologists analyzed the data, they found movement signatures unlike anything in their databases. The energy company immediately classified these findings. Corporate lawyers cited potential complications with environmental impact assessments if unknown species were confirmed in their drilling zones. But leaked documents obtained by Ancient Dreams reveal the full scope of what their instruments detected. The seismic data shows not just individual large animals, but what appears to be an entire population distributed across multiple connected water systems. The movement patterns suggest sophisticated territorial behavior, with different groups occupying distinct ranges but maintaining acoustic contact across vast distances. The implications are staggering. We're not talking about a few surviving individuals. The evidence points to a thriving population of unknown megafauna. What makes this industrial evidence particularly significant is its complete independence from cryptozoological research. These petroleum geologists had no interest in discovering unknown animals. Their sophisticated equipment was designed for an entirely different purpose, yet it captured biological signatures that mainstream science can't explain. Dr. Marcus Webb, a marine acoustics specialist who reviewed the leaked seismic data, describes it as a game changer for the field. The readings show bioacoustic patterns consistent with large vertebrates communicating across territories spanning hundreds of square miles. The frequency ranges and communication structures suggest animals with complex social behaviors and advanced cognitive capabilities. The petroleum company's subsequent actions provide additional evidence of the discovery's significance. Within months of the seismic survey, they quietly abandoned their drilling permits for the entire region. Internal communications suggest that corporate executives decided the potential complications outweighed the economic benefits. When a major energy corporation walks away from proven oil reserves, you know they've encountered something extraordinary. But the corporate cover-up goes deeper than simple economic calculations. Sources within the company report that government officials from multiple African nations became involved once the seismic findings were reported. Diplomatic channels that normally handle trade agreements suddenly focused on this remote corner of the Congo Basin. The level of official interest suggests implications far beyond wildlife conservation. The geopolitical dimensions of this mystery add another layer of complexity to an already baffling situation. If living dinosaurs truly exist in the Congo, their discovery would trigger international disputes over territorial rights, research access, and economic exploitation. The nations that control these territories would suddenly possess biological treasures of incalculable scientific and commercial value. Recent diplomatic activities in the region support this theory. Multinational conservation agreements that typically take years to negotiate have been fast-tracked through various African governments. Protected area designations have expanded to include territories that showed no previous conservation priority. The speed and scope of these environmental protections suggest that powerful interests are moving to secure access to something valuable. The involvement of international conservation organizations has also intensified dramatically. Groups that previously focused on conventional wildlife protection have quietly shifted resources toward the Congo Basin's most remote regions. Their public statements emphasize general biodiversity conservation, but their actual deployment patterns focus specifically on the deep swamp systems where creature sightings occur most frequently. Dr. Amanda Foster, who monitors conservation funding patterns for Ancient Dreams, has tracked over $50 million in new research grants directed toward Congo Basin studies since 2018. The funding comes from sources that have never previously shown interest in African wildlife conservation. Anonymous foundations, technology companies, and even pharmaceutical corporations have suddenly discovered urgent reasons to study the Congo's remotest ecosystems. The pharmaceutical interest is particularly intriguing. Companies that specialize in developing treatments from natural compounds have established research stations in areas previously considered too remote for commercial interest. Their public statements focus on discovering new medicinal plants, but their equipment purchases suggest preparations for studying much larger biological specimens. The technology sector's involvement raises even more questions. Companies that develop biomonitoring systems, genetic analysis equipment, and underwater exploration tools have quietly established operations throughout the Congo Basin. Their presence far exceeds what would be needed for conventional wildlife research, suggesting preparations for documenting something unprecedented. Silicon Valley entrepreneur Marcus Chen, whose company specializes in environmental DNA analysis, admits privately that several major tech firms are positioning themselves for what they believe will be the biological discovery of the century. The potential commercial applications of genetic material from surviving prehistoric species could revolutionize biotechnology, pharmaceutical development, and our understanding of evolutionary biology. The military implications haven't gone unnoticed either. Several nations have quietly expanded their presence in Central Africa, ostensibly for peacekeeping and anti-poaching operations. But the deployment patterns focus heavily on the same remote territories where creature evidence concentrates. When military resources are allocated to protect areas with no strategic value and minimal human populations, other motivations must be driving the decisions. Intelligence sources suggest that confirmation of surviving megafauna would trigger immediate international competition for research access and territorial control. The scientific prestige alone would be worth billions in research funding and technological development opportunities. Nations that control access to living dinosaurs would possess unprecedented leverage in international scientific collaborations. The economic implications extend far beyond academic research. Tourism revenues from confirmed dinosaur populations would dwarf anything currently generated by conventional wildlife viewing. A single verified sighting would trigger a global rush of visitors willing to pay extraordinary sums for the chance to witness living creatures from the age of dinosaurs. The entertainment industry has already begun positioning itself for this possibility. Major film studios have quietly acquired rights to vast areas of Congo Basin territory, ostensibly for movie production, but actually to secure exclusive access should discoveries be confirmed. The investment levels suggest that industry insiders believe confirmation is not a matter of if, but when. Documentary production companies have similarly shifted resources toward the Congo region. Ancient Dreams has identified over 20 major documentary projects currently in development, all focused on the search for unknown megafauna in Central African swamps. The coordination suggests shared intelligence about imminent discoveries. The scientific establishment itself shows signs of preparing for paradigm-shifting revelations. Major universities have established research partnerships with Congo Basin institutions that previously received minimal academic attention. Paleontology departments are quietly recruiting experts in living animal behavior, suggesting preparations for studying dinosaurs that are very much alive. The Vatican has even shown unusual interest in these developments. Papal scientific advisors have made multiple visits to Central Africa, ostensibly for climate change research, but with itineraries that include the exact regions where creature evidence concentrates. The Catholic Church's historical approach to scientific discoveries that challenge established doctrine suggests they're preparing for announcements that could reshape humanity's understanding of life on Earth. These institutional movements create a pattern that transcends normal scientific curiosity. when the world's most powerful organizations begin positioning themselves around a single biological question. It suggests they possess information that hasn't reached public awareness. The convergence of interests around the Congo Basin mystery indicates that confirmation may be closer than anyone publicly acknowledges. The indigenous communities find themselves at the center of this unprecedented attention. Tribes that lived in isolation for generations suddenly face visits from researchers, government officials, and corporate representatives. The traditional knowledge that once belonged exclusively to forest communities has become a strategic resource in a global competition for access to living prehistory. The Baka and other indigenous groups describe the situation with growing concern. Their ancestral territories have become international zones of interest, with outsiders arriving regularly to ask questions about creatures the tribes have always known existed. The sacred becomes scientific, the mystical becomes economic, and the hidden becomes the object of global fascination. Village elders speak of a fundamental change in their relationship with the forest. What once represented a spiritual connection with ancient powers has transformed into a commodity desired by the outside world. The creatures they've respected and avoided for generations have become prizes in a competition they never chose to enter. Some communities have begun restricting access to traditional knowledge, recognizing its value in ways their ancestors never imagined. Information about creature territories, behavioral patterns, and seasonal movements has become closely guarded, intelligence shared only with trusted researchers who demonstrate respect for traditional protocols. The commercialization of indigenous knowledge raises profound ethical questions about intellectual property, cultural respect, and benefit sharing. If these communities possess the key to locating living dinosaurs, they deserve recognition and compensation for their contributions to what would become the greatest biological discovery in human history. International law provides limited protection for traditional knowledge in such unprecedented circumstances. The legal frameworks governing biological discoveries assume that unknown species will be found through conventional scientific methods, not through indigenous wisdom accumulated over millennia. The Congo situation could establish precedents that reshape how the world approaches both conservation and traditional knowledge systems. The pressure on these communities intensifies as outside interest grows. Offers of money, education, and development projects multiply alongside requests for information about creature locations and behaviors. Some villages have been divided by disagreements over whether to share traditional knowledge or maintain ancestral secrecy protocols. The cultural disruption extends beyond simple information sharing. The presence of researchers, film crews, and corporate representatives has introduced modern technology and outside perspectives into communities that maintain traditional lifestyles for generations. The social fabric that preserved ancient knowledge for centuries faces unprecedented challenges from global attention. Yet some communities have found ways to leverage this interest while preserving their cultural integrity. Progressive leaders work with sympathetic researchers to document traditional knowledge in ways that respect tribal ownership, while contributing to scientific understanding. These partnerships represent potential models for ethical collaboration in other indigenous territories worldwide. The documentation process itself reveals the sophistication of traditional knowledge systems. When Baka elders share their understanding of creature behavior, territories, and ecological relationships, they demonstrate scientific observation skills that rival formal academic training. Their knowledge represents centuries of careful study conducted with methods perfectly adapted to forest environments. The integration of traditional and modern knowledge systems has already produced remarkable results. GPS mapping, guided by indigenous territorial knowledge, has identified previously unknown deep water channels, where sonar equipment subsequently detected large underwater movements. Acoustic monitoring positioned according to traditional predictions about creature vocalizations has captured the most compelling audio evidence to date. The collaboration also works in reverse, with modern technology validating traditional knowledge in ways that surprise even sympathetic researchers. Satellite imagery confirms the accuracy of indigenous maps drawn from memory. Genetic analysis validates traditional classifications of plant species and ecological relationships. The convergence of ancient wisdom and contemporary science creates investigative possibilities that neither approach could achieve independently. Dr. Patricia Mbeki, an anthropologist who specializes in indigenous knowledge systems, describes the Congo collaboration as a potential model for addressing global conservation challenges. The traditional communities possess detailed understanding of ecosystem dynamics that took Western science decades to begin appreciating. Their knowledge could guide conservation efforts far beyond the search for unknown megafauna. The partnership approach has also generated unexpected discoveries about known species. Traditional ecological knowledge has led researchers to previously undocumented animal behaviors, seasonal patterns, and ecological relationships that conventional surveys missed entirely. The forest reveals different secrets to those who approach it with appropriate respect and understanding. But time remains the critical factor in these collaborations. The elders who possess the deepest traditional knowledge are aging, and younger generations often lack the same intimate connection with forest ecosystems. The knowledge transfer process faces pressure from both cultural disruption and natural generational change. The urgency creates a paradox for researchers working in the region. The need to document traditional knowledge quickly conflicts with the respect and patience that ethical collaboration requires. Rushing the process risks alienating communities and losing access to information that took generations to accumulate. Yet delay risks losing irreplaceable knowledge as circumstances continue to change. The balance between urgency and respect defines the current phase of creature research in the Congo Basin. Success depends on maintaining community trust while advancing scientific understanding at a pace that matches the accelerating threats to both the ecosystem and the traditional cultures that understand its secrets. The stakes extend far beyond academic curiosity or scientific prestige. The Congo mystery represents a convergence of conservation biology, cultural preservation, and our fundamental understanding of life's persistence on Earth. The outcome will influence how humanity approaches both the protection of wilderness and the respect for indigenous wisdom in an interconnected world. Whether the creatures of the Congo swamps prove to be surviving dinosaurs, unknown reptiles, or something entirely unexpected, their investigation has already revealed profound truths about the complexity of our planet's remaining wild places. The search continues, not just for ancient animals, but for a more complete understanding of the intricate relationships between human knowledge, natural ecosystems, and the mysteries that persist at the edges of our comprehension. The answers may lie hidden in the dark waters of the Likuala, waiting for the right combination of traditional wisdom, scientific technology, and respectful collaboration to bring them into the light of human understanding. Until then, the mystery endures, challenging our assumptions about extinction, survival, and the secrets that our planet still holds in its most remote and ancient places. The traditional knowledge keepers speak of changes in the creature's behavior that align disturbingly with modern environmental pressures. Elders describe how the animals once moved freely between different swamp systems, following seasonal patterns that had remained constant for generations. But recent decades have brought disruption to these ancient rhythms. Climate change has altered the Congo Basin's hydrological cycles in ways that directly impact the deep water refuges where these creatures supposedly shelter. Rainfall patterns that sustained stable water levels for millions of years now fluctuate unpredictably. During extended dry periods, the deeper channels that normally provide hidden highways between territories become exposed, forcing any large aquatic animals into increasingly confined spaces. Dr. Catherine Reeves, a hydrologist who studies Congo river systems, has documented dramatic changes in water flow patterns throughout the Likuala region. Her measurements show that seasonal low water periods now last significantly longer than historical averages, while flood cycles have become more intense but shorter in duration. For animals dependent on stable deep water environments, these changes represent existential threats. The implications become even more sobering when you consider the metabolic demands of creatures the size described in traditional accounts. Large herbivorous animals require consistent access to substantial food sources and adequate territory for sustainable populations. Environmental disruption that forces them into smaller, more concentrated areas could trigger population crashes that would eliminate the species entirely. Indigenous observers report behavioral changes that suggest the creatures are already responding to these environmental pressures. The Baka describe increased aggressive encounters between individual animals, territorial disputes that were previously rare. They interpret these changes as signs that traditional territories can no longer support the population levels they once sustained. The feeding patterns have also shifted according to traditional accounts. Areas that once showed regular harvesting of aquatic vegetation now remain untouched for extended periods, while other locations show signs of overgrazing that hadn't occurred in living memory. The disruption suggests animals struggling to adapt feeding strategies to changing resource availability. Most concerning are reports of creatures venturing into territories they traditionally avoided. Several communities describe encounters in areas where the animals had never been observed before, suggesting that habitat pressure is forcing them to expand into less suitable territories. This expansion increases the likelihood of human encounters, but also indicates stress on the population. The acoustic evidence supports these behavioral changes. Recent recordings show alterations in the calling patterns that traditional knowledge holders associate with distress or territorial disputes. The low-frequency communications that once occurred primarily during dawn and dusk now happen throughout the day and night, suggesting disrupted behavioral rhythms. Dr. Morrison's analysis of these acoustic changes reveals patterns consistent with animal populations under environmental stress. The frequency of calls has increased dramatically, while the duration and complexity of individual communications have decreased. These changes mirror stress responses documented in other large animal species facing habitat pressure. The timing of these behavioral changes coincides precisely with accelerated human impact in the region. Satellite data shows that deforestation rates in the Congo Basin have increased exponentially since 2015, with particularly severe losses in the deep swamp systems that represent the most critical habitat for any surviving megafauna. Mining operations pose the most immediate threat to creature habitat. The extraction of minerals from swampland requires draining vast areas and fundamentally altering hydrological systems. A single mining concession can eliminate thousands of acres of deep water habitat that took millions of years to develop. Logging activities present a more subtle but equally devastating impact. While the deepest swamps remain technically inaccessible to heavy machinery, the construction of logging roads and processing facilities disrupts the broader ecosystem that supports these aquatic environments. The interconnected nature of tropical forest hydrology means that damage in one area cascades throughout the entire watershed. Agricultural expansion represents perhaps the most permanent threat. Unlike logging, which theoretically allows forest regeneration, conversion to agricultural use permanently eliminates wildlife habitat. The deep organic soils of the Congo swamps, once drained, can support intensive farming that makes habitat restoration economically impossible. The cumulative impact of these human activities has compressed the available habitat for any large unknown animals into increasingly isolated fragments. Population biology models suggest that creatures requiring extensive territories could face local extinction within decades if current trends continue. The genetic implications of habitat fragmentation add another layer of concern to the conservation equation. If these creatures exist as small, isolated populations, they face the same genetic bottleneck risks that threaten other endangered megafauna. Reduced genetic diversity leads to decreased reproductive success, increased susceptibility to disease, and eventual population collapse. Traditional knowledge holders express this concern in their own terms, describing how the creature's calls have become fewer and more desperate sounding over recent years. Elders who remember the forest of their youth speak of voices that no longer answer when the remaining animals call across the swamps. The urgency of the situation has prompted some researchers to abandon conventional scientific protocols in favor of more aggressive detection methods. Recent expeditions have deployed extensive networks of automated monitoring equipment throughout the most remote areas, hoping to capture definitive evidence before the window of opportunity closes permanently. These technological deployments represent the most sophisticated wildlife monitoring efforts ever attempted in tropical forest environments. Arrays of underwater cameras, acoustic sensors, and environmental DNA sampling stations now operate continuously in locations where human researchers can visit only briefly. The preliminary data from these monitoring networks has yielded results that both encourage and alarm the research community. While the evidence for large unknown animals continues to accumulate, the frequency of positive detections has declined compared to earlier, less systematic surveys. The pattern suggests that either the animals are becoming more elusive or their populations are decreasing. Dr. James Crawford, who coordinates the automated monitoring network, describes the situation as a race between technological capability and ecological collapse. The equipment can now detect and document animal activity that would have been impossible to observe using traditional methods. But the animals themselves may be disappearing faster than the technology can find them. The economic pressures driving habitat destruction show no signs of abating. Global demand for the Congo Basin's natural resources continues to increase, while local governments face overwhelming pressure to generate revenue from their natural assets. The conflict between immediate economic needs and long-term conservation creates an almost impossible situation for protecting unknown species. International conservation funding, while substantial, cannot compete with the immediate financial benefits of resource extraction. A single mining concession can generate more revenue for local governments than decades of conservation grants. The economic reality makes habitat protection increasingly difficult to justify in purely financial terms. The solution, according to some conservationists, lies in proving the existence of the creatures before their habitat disappears entirely. Definitive documentation of living dinosaurs would trigger unprecedented international interest and funding for habitat protection. The economic value of ecotourism alone could dwarf the revenues from resource extraction. But this approach creates its own risks. Confirming the existence of such creatures would inevitably lead to increased human pressure on their territories. The same international attention that could fund habitat protection might also accelerate the very disruption that threatens their survival. The indigenous communities understand this paradox intimately. Their traditional approach emphasized coexistence through avoidance, maintaining respectful distance from creatures that demanded territorial respect. The modern approach of active documentation conflicts fundamentally with traditional protocols developed over centuries of successful coexistence. Some community leaders have begun questioning whether sharing their knowledge with outside researchers serves their long-term interests. The attention generated by creature research has brought unprecedented pressure to their territories, along with promises of economic benefits that may never materialize for local communities. The ethical dimensions of the research have become as complex as the scientific challenges. The right to document unknown species conflicts with the right of indigenous communities to maintain their traditional relationships with forest ecosystems. The global fascination with living dinosaurs threatens to overwhelm the cultural systems that have protected both the creatures and their human neighbors for millennia. Dr. Mbeki argues that successful conservation in the Congo Basin requires approaches that honor traditional knowledge while addressing modern threats. The indigenous communities possess not just information about creature locations and behavior, but sustainable models for coexisting with large, potentially dangerous animals in shared territories. The traditional management systems developed by Congo Basin communities could provide blueprints for protecting unknown species without the disruption that conventional conservation approaches often create. These systems emphasize territorial respect, seasonal avoidance patterns, and resource sharing agreements that have maintained ecological balance for countless generations. Modern conservation biology is beginning to recognize the sophistication of these traditional approaches. Recent studies of indigenous land management demonstrate conservation outcomes that often exceed those achieved by formal protected area designations. The integration of traditional and modern approaches could provide the most effective strategy for protecting whatever creatures may exist in the Congo's depths. The timescale for implementing such integrated approaches grows shorter with each passing month. Satellite imagery shows accelerating habitat loss throughout the region, while traditional knowledge holders, age and younger generations, lose connection with ancestral wisdom. The window for effective action may be measured in years rather than decades. Recent diplomatic developments suggest that some governments recognize the urgency of the situation. Several African nations have quietly expanded protected area designations in the regions where creature evidence concentrates most heavily. While these protections lack the enforcement mechanisms necessary for complete habitat security, they represent recognition that something valuable exists in these remote territories. International funding for Congo Basin conservation has also increased dramatically, though much of this support comes with conditions that may not align with traditional community priorities. The challenge lies in channeling this increased attention and resources in ways that actually protect both the creatures and the communities that have coexisted with them. The scientific community faces its own internal pressures regarding the pace and methods of creature research. The potential for career-defining discoveries creates incentives for researchers to pursue increasingly aggressive documentation strategies. But the same urgency that drives scientific ambition could ultimately undermine the careful, respectful approaches that traditional knowledge suggests are necessary for successful encounters. The balance between scientific rigor and cultural sensitivity becomes increasingly difficult to maintain as outside pressure intensifies. Researchers must satisfy academic standards for evidence while respecting community protocols that may limit access to the most promising research locations. The tension between these requirements grows more challenging as the stakes increase. The media attention surrounding creature research adds another layer of complexity to an already delicate situation. Documentary crews, journalists, and social media influencers compete for access to communities and territories that were previously isolated from outside attention. The disruption threatens both the creatures themselves and the traditional knowledge systems that could guide their protection. Ancient Dreams has witnessed firsthand how media pressure can transform indigenous communities within a matter of months. Villages that maintain traditional lifestyles for generations suddenly find themselves hosting film crews, researchers, and tourists. The economic opportunities are significant, but so are the cultural disruptions that accompany such rapid change. The challenge for responsible media coverage lies in generating the public awareness necessary for conservation support without creating the kind of sensationalized attention that could harm both creatures and communities. The story of potential living dinosaurs captures global imagination, but translating that fascination into effective conservation action requires careful balance between revelation and protection. The next phase of creature research in the Congo Basin will likely determine whether these mysterious animals survive to be definitively documented or disappear into extinction before science can confirm their existence. The convergence of traditional knowledge, modern technology, and international attention creates unprecedented opportunities for discovery, but also unprecedented risks for the very subjects of investigation. The indigenous knowledge holders, who have maintained awareness of these creatures for countless generations, now find themselves serving as guides for a global search that could either validate their ancient wisdom or transform their world beyond recognition. Their cooperation remains essential for any successful research, but their motivations extend far beyond scientific curiosity to encompass the preservation of their cultural heritage and territorial integrity. The outcome of this investigation will influence not just our understanding of biological diversity and extinction, but our approach to conservation in an interconnected world where traditional knowledge and modern science must find ways to collaborate effectively. The creatures of the Congo, whether they prove to be dinosaurs or something entirely unexpected, have already transformed our appreciation for the complexity of human knowledge systems and the persistence of mystery in our modern world. The search continues in the dark waters of the Likuala. where ancient secrets may yet emerge to challenge everything we thought we knew about the boundaries between past and present, between extinction and survival, between myth and reality. The answers wait in the depths of the Congo Basin, protected by traditional wisdom, threatened by modern pressures, and pursued by a global community that understands the profound implications of what might be discovered in those primeval swamps, where time itself seems to move differently than anywhere else on Earth. Anywhere else on Earth. The convergence of evidence from multiple independent sources creates a compelling case that transcends individual testimonies or isolated discoveries. When petroleum geologists detect massive underwater movements, when acoustic specialists record unexplained subsonic communications, when traditional knowledge holders from unconnected communities describe identical behavioral patterns, the cumulative weight of these observations demands serious consideration. Yet the scientific establishment remains divided on how to interpret this accumulating evidence. Conservative researchers argue that extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and that no amount of circumstantial evidence can substitute for direct, unambiguous documentation of living creatures. They point to the long history of cryptozoological investigations that generated compelling preliminary evidence, but ultimately failed to produce verifiable specimens. The skeptical position carries significant weight within academic circles. Dr. Margaret Thornfield, a vertebrate paleontologist at Cambridge University, represents this cautious approach. Her analysis of the Congo evidence acknowledges its intriguing nature, while maintaining that alternative explanations remain more plausible than surviving dinosaurs. She argues that the acoustic recordings could represent previously unknown whale species that occasionally venture into river systems, that the seismic data might indicate geological phenomena rather than biological activity, and that the traditional accounts could reflect encounters with known animals under unusual circumstances. This skepticism extends to the DNA evidence as well. Contamination remains a persistent challenge in environmental genetic sampling, particularly in tropical environments where bacterial activity and organic decay create complex molecular signatures. The unidentified genetic sequences recovered from Congo water samples could represent degraded material from known species rather than evidence of unknown animals. The photographic and video evidence faces similar scrutiny. Digital analysis of the most promising footage reveals ambiguities that prevent definitive identification. Shadows that appear to show massive forms moving underwater could result from optical illusions created by varying water clarity and lighting conditions. The thermal signatures captured by infrared cameras might indicate temperature variations in the water, rather than large warm-blooded animals. Even the physical evidence encounters challenges under rigorous examination. The footprint casts, while impressive in size and detail, lack the chain of custody documentation that would satisfy forensic standards. The possibility of hoaxes, while unlikely given the remote locations and consistent discoveries across multiple expeditions, cannot be entirely eliminated from scientific consideration. The vegetation damage patterns that suggest large-scale herbivory face alternative explanations as well. Seasonal flooding could create the systematic plant harvesting effects observed along riverbanks. Elephant populations, while typically following different feeding patterns, might exhibit unusual behavior in response to habitat pressure or environmental changes. These skeptical analyses serve an important function in the scientific process, forcing researchers to address potential weaknesses in their evidence and methodology. The scrutiny drives more rigorous data collection and analysis, ultimately strengthening the investigation regardless of its final conclusions. However, the skeptical position faces its own challenges when confronted with the sheer volume and consistency of the Congo evidence. While individual pieces of data might admit alternative explanations, the coherent pattern emerging from multiple independent sources becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss through conventional mechanisms. The behavioral ecology described in traditional accounts shows remarkable consistency with theoretical models of large herbivore survival in tropical environments. The territorial patterns, feeding strategies, and social behaviors described by indigenous witnesses align precisely with what paleontologists would predict for surviving sauropods adapting to aquatic lifestyles. The acoustic evidence presents particular challenges for skeptical interpretations. The subsonic communication patterns recorded in the Congo swamps show characteristics that don't match any known African wildlife. The frequency ranges, duration patterns, and apparent coordination between multiple callers suggest animals with sophisticated vocal capabilities and complex social structures. Dr. Morrison's analysis reveals communication structures that parallel those found in the most intelligent animal species. The apparent signature calls, coordinated responses, and territorial announcements indicate cognitive capabilities that would be expected in large, long-lived animals with complex social relationships. The timing and distribution of these acoustic events also support the biological interpretation. The calls occur most frequently during the periods when traditional knowledge predicts creature activity. The geographic distribution matches the territorial boundaries described in indigenous accounts with remarkable precision. Recent advances in artificial intelligence have enabled more sophisticated analysis of the acoustic data. Machine learning algorithms trained on known animal communication patterns consistently classify the Congo recordings as biological rather than geological or mechanical in origin. The AI systems identify structural elements characteristic of vertebrate communication, while noting features that don't match any species in their training databases. The genetic evidence continues to accumulate as well, despite challenges from potential contamination. Multiple independent laboratories have confirmed the presence of unidentified DNA sequences in water samples from creature habitat areas. While individual samples might be dismissed as contaminated, the consistent recovery of similar unknown genetic material from multiple locations suggests genuine biological sources. Advanced phylogenetic analysis of these mystery DNA sequences reveals characteristics consistent with large reptilian species, but showing genetic divergence that indicates millions of years of separate evolution. If these sequences do represent unknown animals, they suggest creatures that separated from known evolutionary lineages during the Mesozoic era and have been evolving independently ever since. The petroleum industry's seismic data provides perhaps the most compelling evidence, precisely because it was collected for entirely different purposes. The energy companies had no motivation to fabricate evidence of unknown animals, and their sophisticated equipment was specifically designed to distinguish between different types of underwater phenomena. The Congo Basin continues to guard its secrets jealously, wrapped in layers of mist and mystery that have persisted through countless expeditions and decades of investigation. Whether the creatures lurking in those dark waters are surviving dinosaurs, unknown reptiles, or something beyond our current understanding, one truth remains undeniable. The evidence refuses to disappear under scientific scrutiny, growing stronger with each passing year, despite our most sophisticated attempts at explanation. The traditional knowledge holders knew this long before Western science arrived with its cameras and recording equipment. They understood that some mysteries are meant to endure, that certain truths reveal themselves only to those who approach with proper respect and patience. As human pressure continues to fragment their ancient world, we may be racing not just to prove these creatures exist, but to witness the final chapter of a story that began when dinosaurs truly did walk the earth. Perhaps that's the greatest mystery of all. In our relentless pursuit of answers, we may have already found what we were looking for. The question isn't whether something extraordinary survives in the Congo's depths. The question is whether we'll recognize it before it vanishes forever into the realm of legend, taking with it secrets that could reshape our understanding of life itself. Until then, the waters of the Likuala keep their silence, and the search continues.